Ms. Lucky, before you leave, can I call on our current president, Engineer Margarita Leonard, just to give you a token of our appreciation. Thank you very much. So who are you going to call? Call Timas. Thank you very much. Our next presenter, Mr. Marc Rudder, is a graduate from our local university, both in physics and a master's degree in petroleum engineering. He also holds a second master's degree. As a matter of fact, he holds it in environmental engineering. And his topic today is entitled TNT Oil and Chemical Spill Contingency Plan. And in light of the recent mishap that we've seen in the Gulf, I'm sure that there may be a lot of questions that you all would probably want to hear from him, some answers from him. So Mr. Marc is currently a senior petroleum engineer at the Ministry of Energy. He has been with the Ministry of Energy since 1997. He's appointed in 2010 to the cabinet-appointed committee to develop a new national oil and chemical spill plans for Trinidad and Tobago. He's currently functioning as the chairperson of that committee. So I bring to you Mr. Marc Rudder, our next presenter.
I want to thank APET for inviting the Ministry of Energy to make a presentation on the National Oil and Chemical Spill Contingency Plan. When we were given this invitation sometime in 2013, we didn't envisage that we would be sitting where we are today with this current oil spill and the activation of the National Oil Spill Plan. So without further ado, I'll get into the plan, and I will try to leave some quick time for some questions afterwards. Just to give a context into the Trinidad and Tobago, this is a concession map showing the oil and gas license areas of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is to give you an idea as to the kind of activity that might possibly happen, what is happening right now and what might possibly happen in the future, especially as we get back into deepwater operations. So the risks involved in terms of oil spills is not just land-based spills or shallow water spills, but also deep water spills in the future, which is a possibility. But apart from just the oil and gas industry, there's also the shipping industry as well. Shipping has increased dramatically over the past couple of years. And this is just a map showing a density plot of shipping, really showing tankers in the world, basically showing also, if you see in the Caribbean area, not shown very well in this slide, but the Caribbean area is an area of dense vessel traffic. So this is a potential risk for oil spills in Trinidad and Tobago. Just remember that the largest oil spill that occurred in the world related to vessel traffic and marine traffic occurred off of Tobago in 1979. And that is currently the largest oil spill, vessel-related oil spill in the world. All right, so that is also a risk apart from just the oil and gas sector. A committee was set up, as mentioned, in 2010 to develop a national oil spill plan, a national chemical spill plan, a national gas releases plan, and to provide recommendations to Cabinet. This is just showing a list of the committees. Basically, it was involved 11 government agencies and about eight oil and gas companies, upstream and downstream. So I'll just go through the acronyms. We had the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard, ODPM, Ministry of Transport, Maritime Services Division, Ministry of the Attorney General was involved, Fisheries Division, the IMA, EMA, OSH, BP, BHP, BG, Repsol, NGC, NP, Petrotrin, Atlantic LNG, and Foreign Affairs. So it was a very large committee that was set up to develop this new oil spill plan, bearing in mind that the last oil spill plan was developed for Trinidad and Tobago was developed in 1977. All right? The work plan that we had for 2013 was to finalize the National Oil Spill Plan, but we're also dealing with other issues as well. We recognized that we couldn't have the National Oil Spill Plan and the National Chemical Spill Plan in one document, so actually those are two separate documents. So there's a National Oil Spill Plan, one separate document, and there's a Chemical Spill Plan, which is a separate document. That document has been drafted, it is completed, and that is now being circulated within the committee currently for comments, but it is not finalized yet. The National Oil Spill Plan was finalized and was approved by Cabinet on January 31st, 2013. There's also work, we're working on a Tobago spill plan, a special plan for Tobago area. We see that as a special area, and we're working on that along with the THA. We're also working on revitalizing the bilateral oil spill plan we have with Venezuela. And as well, we are trying to implement aspects of the plan, which is the Incident Command System, the Emergency Operations Center, and some other things which I'll go into later. In terms of the plan and what the plan says, the person in charge of the National Oil Spill Plan is called the National Controller. And in the plan, the National Controller has been designated as the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy. And that was done because that person, the Permanent Secretary, would have financial authority to make decisions, and he's the only person in the ministry who has that authority. The Deputy National Controller was designated the Senior Petroleum Engineer in Health, Safety, and Environment, and I currently fulfill that function. And then there's an alternate deputy who is the Chief Mechanical Engineer. Just to bear in mind, in terms of international conventions as it relates to oil spills, Trinidad and Tobago is party to a number of international conventions. Some of them are the Cartagena Convention, 1983, the Oil Spill Protocol, which is a part of that Cartagena Convention of 1983. We also party to the Oil Pollution Response Cooperation Convention of 1990, which is a convention that speaks to cooperation between island states if there is an incident. And we also party to various insurance schemes, which is the Civil Liability Convention and the International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund. These two liability conventions really relate to shipping tanker incidents. So if there's a tanker incident and the party may not be known or the party is known, there are schemes in which Trinidad and Tobago can recoup funds from these conventions, being party to these conventions. If there's an oil spill, there's a particular notification procedure. The responsible party will notify a number of agencies, which will include the Ministry of Energy. That is, as Antonia mentioned, the Ministry of Energy will be notified, also the EMA, and the particular regional corporation in which the oils may impact. Bearing in mind that the oil spill may impact more than one regional corporation, so that could incorporate more than one regional corporation. And if it's through the Ministry Operations Center, then that will initiate a coordination in terms of notification of the Permanent Secretary, the Minister, who will then inform the other line ministers as necessary. And then as well as if there is need be, we need to get resources, we can also go through Petrotrin's EOC. If the oil spill is not related to Petrotrin, we also are the facility to go through the ODPM, which is the National Emergency Operations Center. And the regional corporation of their own, they will have their mechanisms of notification, and they will also have to stand up an emergency operations center if the oil spill is to impact their area of concern. When the oil spill, if it's an oil spill and it's at a national level, then we will set up what is called the Incident Command System. What we are using in Trinidad and Tobago is the US Incident Command System. We have adopted that. That has been approved by Cabinet through the ODPM's mechanism, and we are also adopting this mechanism for managing oil spills, where you have an incident commander. If you have a particular incident, there will be an incident commander, and that commander will have a command staff, which will include a communication officer, safety officer, and a liaison officer, and in some cases, a security officer. And then there'll be 4 branches underneath the incident commander, which would be an operations section, a planning section, logistics section, and a finance administration section. This is the same system that is used by the US in managing oil spills. It was used by the US in the Gulf of Mexico spill, and it's also the system that's being used currently with this oil spill incident. Petrin also uses the incident command system along with all the other major international oil and gas companies. So it is really a system that allows for great integration between the government and the other government agencies, as well as the international oil and gas companies when they have to manage an incident. There's been a lot of talk about this tier system, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I'll just try and give some clarity in terms of what that is. A tier 1, there's a tier 1 spill, there's a tier 2 spill, and there's a tier 3 spill. A tier 1 spill is a spill in which occurs where the responsible party can handle the spill on their own. If they can handle the spill on their own, it's called a tier 1. If they cannot handle it on their own and they need assistance, which will be local or within the country, it will be then considered what is called a tier 2. However, if international assistance is required, then it will be go to what is called a tier 3. Now, normally the stages of going from tier 1 to tier 3 could be a stepwise mechanism going from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, or if the oil spill is of a great magnitude, a large spill, it can go directly to tier 3. It doesn't have to go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. All right? In the case of this laboratory spill, this spill actually went from tier 2 to tier 3. It didn't reside in tier 1 at all. All right? Just to explain the tiers, you could have a small spill, which could be a tier 1, but you could also have a small spill, which could also be a tier 2. All right? So a small spill doesn't necessarily mean that a company can handle it. It really depends on where the spill occurs and what could be impacted by that spill. Sometimes a small spill may not be able to be managed by a company on their own. So a small spill can be a tier 2. All right? In terms of, you will see here in terms of large spills, worst case, medium spills, 10% of worst case, and small spills, 1% of worst case. What we have done is that we have provided in the plan a system whereby which companies can design the equipment requirements and in terms of how much they need to design for. So if they know what their worst case scenario is, they could design for a large spill. And then in terms of designing for a medium spill, just find what is 10% of that. And you could design in terms of what equipment you need to get in terms of skimmers, in terms of dispersants and whatnot. You'll know how much you need to stockpile. If you know what your worst case is, you could build that down in terms of what you need for a medium spill and a small spill. So there are design requirements in the plan that allow operators to design for equipment stockpiling. Just to give an idea, clarity in terms of tier 1 again. Tier 1, each operator, you have operators A to G. They can handle the spill on their own. Tier 2, this is what we plan for tier 2, where the operators will come together and form what is called a cooperative. And this cooperative will be formed in Trinidad, where there will be stockpiles in Trinidad, whereby they will have extra equipment in country to address an oil spill. Because in order to get equipment from overseas, sometimes it takes 24 to 48 hours for that equipment to get into country. And sometimes you don't have that luxury of time to deal with an oil spill. So you need to have extra resources. And instead of each company having extra resources on their own, we have formed a system where they form a cooperative in terms of stockpiling equipment so that it can be shared. This is in the works. This is not finalized as yet. It is something that the companies are working on, and we're hoping that that will be finalized by the end of this year. Bearing in mind the oil spill plan was approved last year, so right now it is a matter of implementing the plan. This part of it is not fully implemented as yet. And then in terms of tier 3, that aspect of it is pretty much fully functional. It's a tier 3 company called OSRL, Oil Spill Response Limited, that has stockpiles of equipment in various parts of the world. The closest part of the world currently is Fort Lauderdale, but there's also stockpiles in Southampton in the UK, and also in Asia and in Africa. So there are different stages of tier 3. Tier 3, first stage could be going to Fort Lauderdale to get equipment, but if you have exhausted the resources in Fort Lauderdale, then you could go to Southampton and get more resources at another level of tier 3. All right, and most of the companies, most of the international companies are members of OSRL. In terms of surveillance and mapping, when there's an oil spill, one of the things that you need to have in place is a proper surveillance system in place. When there's an oil spill, one of the first things you do is you do trajectory modeling to see where the oil can go and what areas can impact, so you can protect those areas. There's also what is called ESI mapping, which is Environmental Sensitivity Index mapping, where you rank the coastline on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of least sensitive and most sensitive. So you know in terms of priorities for protection, if you know that an area is going to be impacted, you will know exactly what areas you want to give in priorities protection, bearing in mind that when there's a spill, you cannot protect all areas. In terms of management, you have to protect the areas that are most important versus the areas that are least important. Right. One of the things we're trying to put in place as well in terms of remote sensing, satellite, infrared, radar technology to provide mechanisms for early detection of oil. And also fingerprinting, which you're probably familiar with now, is a mechanism to determine what type of oil has spilled and also helps to differentiate who is the responsible party and the source of the spill. One of the things we introduced in the plan, especially for drilling operators, is if there's a plan to drill a well, you must do trajectory modeling for a long period of time, not just for a model just to see whether the oil reaches land, but to see what happens after a certain period of time, and we designated certain periods of time, 30 days if you're drilling a well less than 10,000 feet. If you're drilling a well greater than 10,000 feet, you have to model for 45 days to see what will happen. And if you're drilling in deep water, you have to model for 60 days. All right, so that will give you an idea, give it a worst case scenario in terms of what could happen, so it could help you in your planning procedure. In terms of dispersant policy, I don't have much time again to this, but this is a primary technique for dealing with oil spills, especially on a national level. If it's a large oil spill, you don't have the luxury of time to wait for the oil to reach land to recover it. You have to attack the oil. It's a war. Yes, there's defense, but there's an offensive aspect as well. And defense, one of the main defensive mechanisms is the use of dispersants. It's approved by the Ministry of Energy, and there are certain dispersants approved, but there are requirements in terms of where you can use dispersants, in terms of water depth and distance from land, all right, which are in the plan. I wouldn't get into it much time, but in terms of what dispersant does, you can apply dispersants using vessels or aerial by air. And what it does, basically, it breaks up the oil into droplets and allows the oil to be bioavailable to bacteria to be eaten up. So basically, the oil is not reformed when it goes below the surface. It forms small droplets. That's how dispersants operate, and they are able to be dispersed easily within the water column, and then afterwards they are eaten up by bacteria. All right. Another technique which has not been a big area of use in Trinidad, but if there's a major oil spill, is something that we will have to use, which is in situ burning, which basically is burning of the oil and water. It was a main technique that was used in the Gulf of Mexico spill. It hasn't been used, to my knowledge, in Trinidad yet, but if necessary, we have to use it. Just to give you an idea of what in situ burning is, basically you have a boom which surrounds the oil. It concentrates the oil. It gets to a certain thickness, and then you use a heli torch to light the oil, and it burns. And you see that thick black smoke there, which is unsightly, but it's better to do it that way. Remember, oil spill is a trade-off between whether you want it to reach land and cause a greater ecological damage, or you want to deal with it in this way. It's a trade-off you have to make in terms of dealing with a spill. All right, and this is to give an idea. This is the Gulf of Mexico as well. This is what it could look like. All right, but there are certain conditions for using in situ burning. All right. talked about equipment stockpiles. We have in the plan in terms of drills and exercises, a frequency for conducting drills and exercises, which are listed in the plan. There's also a training plan in terms of all the training that is required IMO training and ICS training that is required based on the different designations within the incident command team, whether incident commander, whether you're working in planning, operations, and whatnot. There's certain training that is detailed as required. And then in the plan, what is different from the 977 plan is the deep water requirements, which is a new feature. Any operator that wants to operate in deep water, there are certain things that they must have available, which are containment caps, availability. They must have ROVs, remote operated vehicles, that can support vessel accessibility, that could support operations in deep water, subsea, as well. They must have additional rig accessibility and firefighting capabilities as well. So this brings me to the end, and I think I've reached the 20 minutes, so I have some time for some questions. Thank you.
Okay, at this point in time, I will like to ask that we limit to 2 questions. If we have further questions at the end of the other 2 presenters, we'll ask first. So 2 questions taken from the audience.
Thank you. Chris Ray, CH Schuem Hill. I did not see that you had a limit to where you had to clean to, so many parts per million, I would assume. And one of the things that if you can't clean it that good, can you still clean it and get credit for cleaning it? The reason I ask, and this may have been an urban legend, but I understand on the Gulf of Mexico spill that there was a way that the oil could have been cleaned, but it wasn't good enough for the United States criteria. Therefore, they left it alone, and it would caused a lot more problems.
Clean where again? Clean where?
Clean to a certain parts per million.
Where? Where?
In the Gulf of Mexico.
What area? In the water?
Yes, in the water. Somehow, do you clean it to a certain extent, or do you clean it as good as you can, and how do you regulate that?
Okay. Well, in terms of if there's a large spill, as I said, there are various mechanisms. What you can use booming and skimming, basically. And basically, the technique is remove all visible oil. All right? It's to remove all visible oil from the surface of the water. All right? So in dispersal application, basically disperse the oil until you cannot see it. But I'm not aware of any ppm requirements in terms of a cleaning in an offshore environment. Yes. All right. I know there are main requirements for shoreline cleaning in terms of ppm, but I've never heard of any requirements for offshore for ppm cleaning. Yes, never heard of that.
Okay, any other questions? Sarah Bernard?
Hi, good day. Given the recent oil spill, what would you say is the biggest lesson learned? And going forward, are you all, I know this plan is in the process of being implemented. Have you noticed like a big gap in the plan that you all want to change, or what's the biggest lesson learned? And going forward, what are you going to focus on to, first to improve your next response if there should be a next spill?
Right. Well, I mean, with this spill, one of the issues is in terms of the time, the amount of time that you have, and the amount of knowledge that you have in terms of how much has spilled and where it is going. And what I see really needs to happen is that, as I mentioned, trajectory modeling. I mean, you can run a model. If you know there's a spill, you can run a model at that point in time, but you may not get the results in time for when the oil reaches shore. So actually what needs to happen is that companies need to run all scenarios, all possible scenarios for spills for their operations. So all you have to do right now is if there's a spill, you pull up the model and you know exactly where the oil is going to go and you know exactly where you need to protect. So instead of trying to, some of the focus that we had was doing aerial surveillance and trying to monitor where the oil is going. But in a case like this, what happened with this oil is this oil actually sank below the water, so you actually couldn't see it. All right? And the oil type of oil that sank is bunker C. But bunker C is lighter than water. But what we believe happened is that the oil would have picked up sediment along the way and sank below the water. And so you couldn't see it, and you only saw it when it actually resurfaced on land. So what really needs to happen is that you need to do a trajectory modeling, know exactly where areas might be impacted, and actually deploy your equipment in anticipation that the oil will reach these areas. All right? Yes, there are some things in the plan that I see that we probably need to focus on in terms of the type of personnel that we have and the roles and functions in the incident command team. There may be some clarity in terms of issues related to oil wildlife, I see, but by and large, I think the plan itself was pretty robust. But what I plan to do is when we go back to committee, we will talk to all the other partners, all the other stakeholders, and see what areas they saw that needs to be amended. And we will look at that and amend those areas that are seemingly deficient.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark,
Yes.
for that lovely presentation. And you can catch up.